So I think now, knowing what we understand from what a framework is, and we have motivated why we believe we need another framework, and explained what ExoFutures' role in this partnership for goals is, like finding gems like Debbie out there. It's time to introduce this framework, Craig. So I hope we are ready to do that. And everybody, I would like to invite you again to please ask questions in the chat. Just a reminder that what we're talking about here is not just about a new framework for the disenfranchised. It's also a framework for investors, a framework for our entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs, for enterprises as well, because we all have the shared passion to make our country work, and it starts with something practical that works on the ground. So Craig, over to you to introduce the Exponential Future Framework from ExoFutures to impact enterprises and the disenfranchised.
Yeah, so the final picture is a bit hairy, isn't it? So let's break it down. And start with, so from an individual perspective, Liesl, you talk about the gems like Debbie. We've found many of these gems in these organizations, and we found that when you go into a community, so the first thing is to get into a specific context where the individuals are experiencing the challenges and the problems, and identify them. And they are the first asset in that community, irrespective of their backgrounds, their circumstances, their sort of initial lack of hope. We really believe that we need to start a movement. We need to get individuals to have hope, and to see that if we don't take and have that agency and take control of our circumstances in those communities, nobody's going to do it for us. We certainly have seen that the government won't do it for us. The government can't create jobs. As much as they've created initiatives like the YES program, which is fantastic to a point, that gives a few people some hope for a period, and then many of those people don't actually go back into the communities and solve the problems that are in those communities, other than to have some income that they might leverage back into the community. So really understand, in the context of the environments that we're trying to impact and change, who's doing what are the real challenges, and in many cases it's drug abuse, it's child-headed families, it's Guy Harris is on the call. His passion is early childhood development. Those issues. Debbie's also big on early childhood development. Those issues on the ground can be addressed more effectively if individuals have agency, take responsibility, and leverage the resources, and learn to be more effective in terms of problem solving, and their mindset and their attitude to how do we solve this. We have to build trust, and we have to give them the tools to be more effective in addressing these problems. So getting the individuals going is the first point. And then getting them to realize that we can't do this alone, and we have to start to network more effectively. We have to start to collaborate more effectively. We have to stop being suspicious of one another. We have to stop being suspicious of the businesses that are acting in our communities, in spite of historically, much of what business has done. And I'm not going to pull any punches here, is extract value from these communities. The extraction of value to the richest of the rich is actually sickening, as far as I'm concerned. And we need to flip that script, and we need to create the connections between people that help the value stay in those communities and flow in those communities. So networking, collaborating, sharing, sharing value, creating value, a bigger pie for everybody through the networks that we can build is the next circle in the framework.
And that's important to note, that we are helping the individual in their community to identify what those networks are that they have access to immediately. And that obviously from one community to another, this model is customizable, as you will point out a little bit later, Craig.
Yeah, so I mean, to that point, what we found is that every community has, it's not entirely different. There are lots of common problems, and that's the first place that one needs to leverage is, as we learn what works in one, let's try and get it to work in the next and help it to work in the next. But there are unique problems in each community. And therefore, in each, as each community builds and begins to collaborate more effectively, we need those unique things to be addressed as well. There's obviously different social relationships. There's different social enterprises, different NPOs, different churches. What's the term? Different assets. But I'm thinking of
demographic,
different societies in each community, that are focusing on the needs of that community. I mean, I think of Debbie, your green movement in the Bosmont area. That's specific to Bosmont, but that could be leveraged into other communities. So what can we learn from that as an example? So community specific capabilities, but that can either be leveraged into other communities or that have been sort of unrecognized and under leveraged or under supported in that community is a next key aspect of the framework.
Yes, absolutely.
So not just the one-on-one connections between individuals, but building those societal and organizational community connections to leverage the assets in the community.
Yes, and what everybody will be seeing now is that we are enabling the individual to start developing a capability to utilize the full ecosystem, which we are moving towards.
I'm just replying to Guy's question about the slides. They will be shared. And then, what we're really trying to do is say, okay, so if we can create shared value in these communities, if we can create an economic flow in these communities that is, not just one circular economy flow that might come out of recycling, as an example. What we've seen is that you have to look at multiple aspects of value creation in a community. So for example, in Ward 69 and 82, which is where we met Debbie, the first thing we're putting in is digital access through the churches, which is essentially broadband Wi-Fi. So now you've got digital access, but let's not leave it there. Let's then go and say, okay, we've created some digital access into a couple of the halls and assets that exist in that environment. How do we now uplift the early childhood development that's happening in those environments because of the digital access? And okay, so now we can also begin to show people how they can use the ground in the churches or the ground in the communities. There's some, there are parks, and people are even doing these things on pavements where you can start to grow food gardens. So what are all the things that you can leverage through digital access, through beginning to create some financial inclusion and some digital inclusion to create sustainable social ecosystems and to make that expand exponentially. We don't have time to do these things one initiative at a time. If we leave this up to training one program at a time, or whatever the example is, we're not going to win this game. We really need to think big and look to make an impact in communities or in specific areas quickly and effectively. So for example, in Ward 69 and 82, it's right next to Industria. All the factories in Industria are either being used for nefarious stuff like chop shops or not used at all. I would estimate from what I've looked at, 80% of those factories are empty. I mean, that used to be the industrial hub of Johannesburg. Can we turn those into vertical food gardens by teaching people to start to, grow food themselves? That's the kind of thing we're trying to look at doing, so that we can do stuff at scale and begin to supply out of those vertical food gardens, the big retailers, the Woolies Foods of the world, etc. That's the kind of thinking that we believe is necessary for exponentially sustainable social ecosystems.
Absolutely. And we had the other example last week with Diane, Craig, where she's not from the community, and she has a skill, she has an expertise, and part of what she does is recycling. And with her recycling initiative, I would like you to talk to that as well. They're building classrooms. Yeah. Please talk a little bit to how the
I mean, the whole eco-bricks thing, eco-bricks thing is amazing. I mean, I don't know if people have seen it, but you basically take the plastic 2-liter bottles and you shove as much plastic into them as you possibly can find to make the bottle as hard and robust and resilient as possible. And then you stack those with some cement. I think it's cement. I'm not sure exactly what the material is that they've used, but you stack those, and they've built a number of classrooms in Diepsloot using the eco bricks. So where we would then come in is say, okay, how can we scale this? How can we make this ubiquitous in terms of giving people opportunity to log their community service for creating eco bricks, as an example, far and wide? The biggest problem that they're having with the eco-brick thing is the logistics challenge. So how can we Uberize the logistics around getting the eco-bricks to where they need to be to build the next classroom or the next church hall or whatever it might be? So we'll digitize the process and the learning and the experience of the people that are doing it, so that once the particular environment where the classrooms are being built at the moment, once that project is done, where's the next one, so that it becomes sustainable and it carries on having the impact that it's having in that Diepsloot area at the moment, as an example.
Yeah, and further to that is the collection of the recycled bottles, etc. So this is how the whole ecosystem, not limited to the community and the networks in that community, will benefit from growing and learning how to use the entire exponential sustainable social ecosystem around them. Now, let's go to the exponential attributes, Craig. And I think it's important to point out here that the attributes extend throughout the entire framework.
Yeah, so you'll see that each sort of pie slice there says exponential attribute. And, so we still offer training on the exponential organizations playbook. I guess we should reference it here in terms of the exponential attributes for future. It comes from the Open EXO framework, which looks at 11 attributes, starting with a massive transformative purpose. And even there, you start with an individual. You say to the individual, what's your purpose? Simon Sinek talks about find your why, but a massive transformative purpose kind of goes a bit beyond the why, because it looks at community. It looks at the assets that you can leverage. So there are 11 exponential attributes which you can leverage across this whole framework. And I've mentioned, using the churches in the communities. That's a leveraged asset that is one of those exponential attributes, where now, if you think of Airbnb, they don't have their own hotels. They use everybody else's assets in terms of property. And why can't we do that in communities? If you think of Uber, they don't own their own vehicles. We need to solve the logistics problem with the eco bricks. If we can Uberize that with local people moving these eco bricks around and getting being incentivized to do that in some way, then that's a leveraged asset as well. So I'm not going to go through all 11 attributes. I've mentioned the massive transformative purpose. I think that's absolutely critical for these exponentially sustainable social ecosystems to have a common purpose that is transformative, that is about the whole objective that they're looking to address. So it would likely go way beyond their community. It would likely be even more global, because it must be repeatable, sustainable, reusable, and it must be able to scale. So yeah, the exponential attributes just create another layer of transformation in this whole model. I don't know if you want to add to that, Liesl.
No, Craig, I think we need to understand that there's exponentiality within our underserved communities, which we are need to help the community to see, and then to use the word agency again, to help them see what they are capable of doing through using those attributes. Now, summarizing. Sorry, there's some apologies coming in about load shedding, etc. So please note that we will share the recording with everybody as well as the presentation. Then in summary, Craig, let's wrap up the framework that we have designed to enable communities.
Yeah, so I've kind of touched on it. We believe that digital access, firstly, and digitization is absolutely critical, and actually beginning to platform some of these solutions. So really what that means is, if you think of the Uber example or the Airbnb example, what are the digital solutions that enable this transformation, this flow of frictionless value creation and essentially job creation in these communities through having access to the tools and systems that make this easy to manage, easy to sustain, is where the platform for scale element comes in, so that you can easily move into the next community and enable the capabilities to be shared, whether that's learning content or whether that's a process that is a best practice process in early childhood development, as an example. We need to digitize those and platform them and get them out there, to address essentially 4 layers: the skills development, the digital processes and capabilities that you need to make this stuff effective, like an Uber does, like an Airbnb does, but not just one linear thing, as many of these things interacting together on a platform that works for the communities that we serve. Then there's also the need to create new ventures. So, some of these things are just a case of saying, if you take the EcoBrick process that we can digitize, it's an existing process, it's working, but it doesn't scale because people don't have access to how to get it to work more effectively. What are the problems that can be digitized that'll take out the friction in the flow, etc. But guess what? There are white spaces where new problems can be addressed, and we can create new jobs. Or maybe not new problems, existing problems aren't being addressed, and we can create new jobs. So that's the venturing piece, which is the third layer of platforming. And then the final layer of platforming is, how can we gamify this stuff? So if we add the element of what's it called? Community service that the schools have to do. Sorry, my brain is a fog. If we add the element of community service that the schools have to do, you can begin to incentivize all of the schools countrywide do more eco bricks, and if you're able to Uberize the logistics part of that, now you've got a platform that where there's multiple sides to supplying and meeting the need, and the education side on how you can actually build a classroom or build a house for that matter. So, I mean, I'd rather see eco brick accommodation than these tin shacks that people are living in, as an example. So how do we platform that stuff is what we're trying to address here. Liesel, do you want to try and make a bit more sense of that? You're muted.
Not really, Craig. So what I think what I would like to add is what's ExoFutures role in enabling this. So it really comes down to what we said at the beginning, is to equip people with the agency and skill sets they need to evolve through this framework. And I think that really leads us into the next section of this workshop in terms of how do we now make this real?